Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us. We're doing a live tonight with Margaret from MI Gluten Free Gal, which is Michigan Gluten Free Gal. Thank you for coming, Margaret.
You are so welcome. Thanks for having me. It's kind of a fun way to spend a Friday evening. I don't do a whole lot.
Well, you're one of the people that I've wanted to do a live with for a while. I'm just kind of slow at getting the ball rolling sometimes.
That's all right. I've told people, I'm like, I don't really have a whole lot planned for Celiac Disease Awareness Month because I'm like, as some of my followers know, I just had a massive breast reduction surgery 6 weeks ago. So I'm like, whatever ends up happening, ends up happening. Like, people ask me last minute, sure, whatever. Like, but I'm not good at pre-planning at this moment. So.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you joining. I always say we. It's like the royal we.
Yeah.
So today we are talking about fertility and all the things that go along with it. It's a topic that I believe should be talked about more. And so many people don't realize that fertility is actually an issue for a lot of people who are diagnosed with celiac disease.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, sorry, I'm just looking at my questions here for Margaret, but we had talked about, so one thing in the celiac community is when you go to a doctor and you say, oh, I have these symptoms and all this stuff, a lot of them will just say, just go gluten free, just try it out. Maybe that'll be the problem, right? That's what it is. So there's a lot of self-diagnosis in the community.
Mm-hmm.
So for you, what are your biggest concerns with women self-diagnosing celiac disease or NCGS or
Right.
intolerance?
One thing that I will say, just generally, regardless of fertility or reproductive health, like obviously, like if they're wrong, you're on a really strict diet that you don't need to be on, and it's a really serious diet.
For sure.
Lack of nutrients. I don't know about Canada, but here in the United States, like a lot of gluten-free flours products are not fortified with vitamins and minerals like wheat flour products are. And we know research says that people who don't have a firm diagnosis are more likely to cheat on their diet. Those things in general. But however, the one thing that scared me or really stuck out to me. So in 2020, I ended up having an ovary removal and a fallopian tube. I still have one on a fallopian tube on the left side, but my right ovary, my right fallopian tube were removed in 2020. And I had an ovarian cyst, and that's why it was removed. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But my gynecologist said, that's a possible concern for ovarian cancer. And I'm like, I don't even know anything about ovarian cancer. I don't even know what the symptoms are. And so when I looked it up, I'm like, well, let's see, bloating, bowel changes, abdominal pain, fatigue, nausea. I'm like, those are all symptoms we have with people who have celiac disease. And so ovarian cancer is often diagnosed very late because we don't have good screening methods for that. And the American Cancer Society estimates that 12,000 women will die this year in a 12-month time from ovarian cancer. Because again, when we find it, it's just too late. And so knowing all those things, I'm like, man, like I don't want people to self-diagnose like, oh, I'm bloated or whatever. And, and it's true, you could try eating gluten-free and it could get better, but it also seems like from the research I see, like, those symptoms, the bloating, the whatever, that's kind of like intermittent throughout the whole time. Like sometimes it gets better, sometimes it gets worse. And so I would be really nervous about a woman diagnosing themselves with celiac when it could be ovarian cancer. And I shared about this last year on my Instagram feed, and I had a few people thank me. They said, thank you so much. Like my mom died from ovarian cancer. Another person was like, my friend died in their 20s from ovarian cancer because nobody talks about this. I have one follower that actually I talk to her a lot now. She ended up having ovarian cancer, but, ended up being concerned enough and got it taken care of very early. So, I mean, she's been 6 years cancer free now. But I think, and cancer is such a scary word, and we don't even think about cancer down there, And my aunt just is recovering from uterine cancer and massive radiation. And then that, totally destroyed her intestinal tract. She's had major digestive issues since. And so I think like I just don't want people to self-diagnose this because you could be wrong. And it could be it could be cancer, which, sounds scary. And it's most often it's not, but I'm like, especially with ovarian cancer, when we know so little and there's so little screening, I would just want women to make sure they get an accurate celiac disease diagnosis, what you need to be eating gluten for, and then you do the blood test and the biopsy. I'm still a fan of biopsy. I know some people aren't, but I think it's important because, like I know the second time I had an endoscopy done with a new gastro doctor, like he found a different problem. Like, once your intestines have been damaged like that, you could have other issues. You could have hernias, you could have all sorts of issues. And so it's good to get an idea, like a baseline of what's going on down there. Yeah. And actually, I'm on my third gastroenterologist now. Unfortunately, my favorite one that I had, he died. So now I'm at University of Michigan. And even though my TTG levels were fine, they actually found intestinal damage from celiac, which I don't know how because I have a dedicated gluten-free house. But that just goes to show, like, you can't base it all on blood work or you feel fine. Like, it's still important to have those baseline tests and to look forward at things. Because people, too, can have, you can have celiac and Crohn's. You can have celiac and IBS.
I do.
So, you do? Yeah. So yeah, that's my, especially after having that situation happen with me, that's really a big thing with me now. It's like, please don't self-diagnose because it really could be a different issue that's important.
Right. Right. Just as long as people need to continue seeing their doctor and say, hey, this isn't going away or it's coming and going or like I can see that. The endoscopy, I mean, I think but my blood work did not show celiac disease because I couldn't make it through the test, like through the gluten challenge, because I had gone gluten-free on my own because I figured, I didn't know a lot about celiac disease, gluten-free, anything like that. It was just I tried the paleo diet because I was feeling like crap. And, you read all the stuff online about how grains are high carb and all this stuff. And so I tried it and I felt so good, so good. And so, but then, I started reading a little bit about celiac disease. My aunt was diagnosed with celiac disease. And it was like, you know what? These boxes are all being ticked. So I went to my doctor and I said, look, I need this test. So she did the test, even though I was gluten-free still already. I wasn't stringent though, but I was for the most part. And of course it came back with a negative result because I wasn't eating gluten. And so I said, well, hey, let's go ahead and do the gluten test, right? So she said 6 to 8 weeks. I didn't make it past 2.5 weeks. I went into anaphylactic shock twice.
Oh, wow.
The bottoms of my feet were round from so much inflammation. I had DH on my fingers. I couldn't function. The brain fog was so bad. And I teach my son, like I homeschool him, except starting next year I'm not. But so I couldn't function. I couldn't drive. I couldn't barely walk. I was just a mess. And I couldn't continue. So based on family history, all of my multiple abdominal issues and such, then my doctor said, you have celiac disease. That's it. But when I was in the hospital with COVID, I actually had an endoscopy done because my abdomen swelled up really bad when I was in a coma. And they did the endoscopy and apparently my intestine looks good. My small intestine is good. But they diagnosed me with Ogilvie syndrome, which is a really rare intestinal issue. It affects motility and such like that. So when you were saying you don't know what you're going to have, like if you do the regular endoscopies, they might catch something that you had no idea you had.
Right.
And they did for me. So
Right. I never had a blood test because of family history. Like I ended up straight to endoscopy. I didn't even
oh, wow.
because my dad had it, my grandmother had it. So and my mom worked in the hospital and knew a gastroenterologist, and
Oh,
they said
nice.
let's just do the biopsy automatically, given family history. So
Right.
yeah.
It's hard to get into a gastroenterologist up here. So it's yes, we have free healthcare,
Right.
but I've been waiting for over a year now, and I
Wow.
haven't even gotten an appointment yet, let alone,
Wow.
spending to see one. But with COVID, it's a little different, right?
Right.
Things are different. So, and
Yep.
actually, that's kind of a good segue too. With you were mentioning that there were supposed to be 12,000. They think 12,000 people were going to be diagnosed this
Yeah.
year.
No,
That's
not
insane.
diagnosed, die.
Oh, die. Oh,
They
oh
estimate
my
that 12,000
goodness.
people will die from ovarian cancer in a year.
And you got to wonder too if that is a number that is normal for that, or is it based on the fact that people just aren't going into the doctor anymore right now, or can't
Um,
get into the doctor?
that may have been like, I don't know. I was looking at their website, so that was an estimate for this year. So I don't know if that's average or not.
Just it's ridiculous.
Yep.
But um, so reproductive health,
Mm-hmm.
since we're there, many women are really reluctant to speak about it, like their reproductive health. So, I mean, again, I really appreciate you doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but can you tell us about your journey to finding the endometriosis, fibroids?
Sure. So for me, luckily I have a gynecologist that's like super awesome. He's super sweet. He's just the nicest guy. Um, and I had gone in, I think for like a yearly pap or something, pap smear. And, I had recently, before that appointment in 2020, I had noticed much more pain during intercourse than usual. And so I said something to him, which is, always nervous to say it to a guy in general, too. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
like, but, and he's like, well, and he did like some things, like he's like, well, your uterus seems to be in the right position, or whatever. He's like, but let's just do some other tests just to make sure we're not missing anything. So I had a vaginal ultrasound, which is not comfortable. So you definitely want to have a tech or radiologist person, whatever, that's sympathetic and kind. But it was through that ultrasound they discovered my fibroids and my ovarian cysts. And and it's been interesting because my mom had a complete hysterectomy when she was 43, and I'm 43. And so I've
Oh,
always been telling my primary doctor, like, I have these concerns. And she's like, well, if you're still having your period, then you're fine. And it was just like, if you have your period, you apparently have good reproductive health, which I think is crap because
yes.
there's obviously there was not something fine. So that's how the fibroids and the cyst was discovered. To be safe, my doctor wanted me to have a pelvic MRI to see the cyst, and the person reading that test thought it was cancer. And so, which, luckily my OBGYN is very down to earth. He's like, yeah, that guy thinks everybody has, like, he says that for every single report.
Oh,
He always thinks it's malignant. So he's like, okay, let's do, there was a blood test that like tests for like basically like cancer markers or something,
mhm.
which mine came back basically negative. And and he said, what, just you are older. Let's just remove it. Let's, it's a laparoscopic procedure. I don't have to cut you all the way open, probably. And I did end up meeting with an oncologist just that he wanted to have in the room in case, because sometimes you do something and then you find, and that's for me, like the laparoscopic, he opened, he's like, I've never seen somebody with so much endometriosis. Like, he's like, this was vast. It was everywhere.
Wow.
So, and I knew one person in my life that had endometriosis, and her periods were so horrible. Like, she was incapacitated. I've never had that. I've had period pain. A lot of women have, I mean, we all have cramps pretty much.
Yeah.
And so there was nothing that really made me think I had endometriosis. So I was really surprised when he found that. And like he took pictures, took pictures and showed me and everything. So yeah, that's how I, it was all because I was brave enough to speak up and say, this hurts and I don't think it should. And I think a lot of women think that that's just normal. And there is, with intercourse, there is some, discomfort that can be normal. But and said, 75% of women report pain during intercourse. And I'm like, one, we shouldn't have to suffer like that because it should be something pleasurable. But two, it could be the sign of something really serious. Because again, pain during intercourse is a sign of ovarian cancer. So, I think as uncomfortable and nervous as we may be, we need to be willing to speak up for ourselves. So that's my situation and finding out my cysts and all that stuff. So, and then the interesting thing is, and this will kind of, and we have some other questions that we might talk about, like, so by then, like this was what, 2020. So I've been infertile for, 10 plus years. We'll have been married 20 years, 19 years this August. And so, that was 2 years ago. So like 17 years we were married and I was never able to get pregnant. And there's a lot of guilt and shame in that feeling. And, and I had a talk with my gynecologist, he's so down to earth. I love him. He ended up having like a stroke right after my surgery. So like my post-op appointment got like pushed back. And so we had to do all of our post-op stuff via telehealth. And so like, it was kind of nice though, because my husband could sit there right with me, like because of COVID at that time, like we didn't have vaccines at the time in 2020, like he couldn't come into office appointments with me. He was able to come in to pre-op for surgery that day because he had to drop me off for one, but he was able to meet the surgeon, which was my OB/GYN. But, and afterwards, like, he was able to explain, like, no, your endometriosis was so severe. He's like, that's why you couldn't have kids. That's what caused your infertility. It's not that you're a failure or anything. He's like, and then for me, like, I'm sure a lot of other women experience this. Like, when I was first, when we were trying, like, I had people say, oh, you're just nervous or you just need to relax and it will happen. Instead of helping me to be proactive and say, okay, like maybe we need to check your hormone levels or maybe we need to check this or check that. And so, you get to the point where you just feel like a failure. And I wish that doctors and that doctor at that time, I don't see her anymore because she misdiagnosed an abscess that she thought was vaginal, was actually anal. She misdiagnosed me for 6 months and ended up having to have a colorectal surgery. And I'm like, yeah, we don't see her anymore because
no.
So, but that's, but I've had people at church, other people say that all the time, like, oh, it will happen. Just calm down, just relax, just have fun. Don't worry about it. And I'm like, and here I am 43 and no kids. And, which has been a journey to be at peace with, but, yeah. So it was nice to have a doctor say like, no, like, here's the medical reason why you couldn't get pregnant. This is totally the reason why you couldn't get pregnant. Yeah. So, he was really great about it. Like, I almost feel like he's like my grandpa, except for he's not that old, like my grandfather is long past, but he's a much older man and, is really great about listening really well and answering questions really well. So, yeah.
Yeah. See, I agree with you. There needs to be more, not just physical health care for women, but mental health care also when it comes to women who are trying to conceive, because it is mentally, we were talking about this before. My fertility journey is different than yours. I was able to conceive, but I was told that I had PCOS. So, and
for those who don't know what that is, that's polycystic ovarian syndrome. So.
Yes. I always want to say paracystic for some reason, but yes, it's polycystic. But yeah, so you get basically your cysts or your ovaries are covered in cysts,
Right.
and the egg can't get out, pretty much.
Right.
Is so, and so I was told at that point, you can't have kids, plain and simple. And I didn't know anything about it, and it's just been in my later years, we'll say, that I've done more research on my own health, reproductively and all that stuff. So I was told I couldn't have kids. So at the time it was like, okay, I didn't really want them, to be honest. Then I met my husband, and it was like, okay, he's going to make a good dad. I want to have a kid, and then of course, it took us 3.5 years, which doesn't seem long in the grand scheme of things, especially considering what you went through and are still going through. But that feeling of being a failure and not being able to do this one thing that a woman's body is supposed to be able to do. And yeah, so I can relate there. And it's difficult at this time of year, especially for people who aren't able to conceive, because we have Mother's Day coming on Sunday, and obviously it's every second post is Happy Mother's Day, and right, and so it's something that I think we all need to remember when we do those kinds of posts, because we tend to forget, I guess, that there are people out there who are really, I don't know how to say it, but it's damaging. Yeah. It's emotionally damaging to see those posts. I know when I went through it, it was, I hated it. Every time there was a baby shower, or my friend was able to get pregnant just when her husband hung his hat when he got home, kind of thing, It was that kind of thing. So I think that we just all need to be a little more maybe careful or respectful around that.
Yeah.
But,
and I think I've been wanting to write a post too, like, for me, like I hope she doesn't end up like my mom and I, and she knows this, we have an interesting relationship. I'll put it that way. Our history is not free and easy. My childhood was not Ozzy and Harriet. It was not that at all. And we're working on things, but I'm like, where's the card that says, I want to love you, but we have trust issue? Where's the card for my husband that should say, you are my family and I love you whether you're a mom or not? And for me, like, where's the card that says, I love you, you're my stepmom, and my life is so much better for having you in it? Because I'll tell you, I looked for those cards. They don't exist. They just don't exist. Because I know, like, I think it was I know I was at Walmart a couple of years ago, like, specifically looking for a card that was for a stepmom. And like, there's some lady standing there like, oh, your mom is the best thing that, everybody's mom is the best thing that ever happened to them. I'm like, you know what? I live in Flint, where there is a lot of poverty, child abuse, violence. I'm like, no, not everybody's mom is the best thing since sliced bread. We need to be really mindful of that. And I think about that too, like, my husband's a teacher, and like, when we do these projects at school for elementary kids, and it's make your mom a Mother's Day card, and I'm like, what are we forcing these kids to write sometimes? Like, it's, not, and same with Father's Day, like, especially here in Flint, we talk about poverty and crime, and we have a lot of, and Flint is predominantly Black. We know we have a lot of Black men that get incarcerated, definitely at higher rates than white men do. So like, you want to talk about Happy Father's Day, like, their dad's not there. Their dad's simply not there. And I have kids in our neighborhood that I care for. That is exactly the situation. Their father is not in their life at all. So, just these days, and it's important, I loved my dad, and I'm doing better with my mom. But, these days that are set arbitrarily, like, we don't understand the difficulty, or like, people will tell me like, oh, well, at least you're a dog mom, or, like, or you've helped these kids. And I'm like, just just don't say any of that. Just say, have a
Yeah.
nice day. Just say, have
Yeah.
a nice day, you know? So, yeah, my cousin actually texted me today, and I love her. She lives in Seattle. Someday I hope to go see her. And she's like, you know, and we're at the stage too, like, you know, my mom has had a stroke and her mom is the one with the surviving uterine cancer. Like we're at that stage now where we're caring for our parents. You know, my husband's father has had a stroke. You know, we're talking about dementia and Alzheimer's with his mom. So now we're like a parent all over again, but in a different way, you know. So it's you know, and it is hard, you know, for Brad, my husband, for Mother's Day to know that his mom doesn't remember. I mean, she remembers him. She's not that far removed, but like, you know, we're hearing the same stories over and over again, repeated, and it's just because she doesn't remember that she's told it, or you know, you're like, I love my mom, but I'm losing a little bit of her, you know, every year. So, yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to just take a quick little look here over on the side, and we do have a question from Sarah Pelletier.
Yeah, I saw that. She's like, I need to rewatch this from the beginning. Is that the one? Yeah.
I feel so much better without gluten. Okay, so
and it's interesting that she says that. So, like, even though I have endometriosis, I'm not the most knowledgeable person in the world. And Sarah mentioned I can't even say adenomyosis, whatever. Erica from Celiac and the Beast has been really great about telling her stories with endometriosis and adenomyosis and having a hysterectomy very young and feeling like she's going through early menopause. So, like, Sarah, I would really recommend talking to Erica from Celiac and the Beast. She's really great about that sort of stuff. So, but yeah, I also don't recommend taking gluten out of your diet unless you've been tested for celiac first. So.
Yeah, me too. I recommend it. I recommend eating gluten. Eat it. But with the hysterectomy, I mean, I ended up having to have a hysterectomy as well because of what my doctor said was precancer cells. And then once he took my cervix and uterus out, he told me he also found endometriosis. So, you know, obviously those were likely contributing to me not being able to conceive.
And I did try to do some reading before this. Like there have been some studies about celiac disease and endometriosis. It looks like it's more common with people with celiac disease, but it also sounds like we need some more research and study before we definitively say some stuff. Romina, I wanted to address what Romina put, that she was diagnosed with celiac 2 years ago through blood work. No one in my family has celiac. I've gone GF since diagnosed. However, I usually feel like burping feels like something is stuck in my throat. I would recommend one, if you've never had a scope, get one done. That sounds like a hiatal hernia. I have had similar symptoms, although ironically, when I saw my gastroenterologist for a scope back in December 28th, he said he saw no evidence of a hiatal hernia, which is so weird because it was my prior gastro that diagnosed with one. But that is definitely a feeling that I feel like something's like almost stuck in my chest, that things aren't going down well. So it is possible. Again, I'm not a doctor or nurse. I'm no medical professional, but that sounds similar to my hiatal hernia symptoms. And that's very, very common in women. Very, very common. Like all the women in my family have one. And I will say, since my breast reduction, I have fewer symptoms like that because I had almost 7 pounds taken off of my chest. And so that is definitely, I'm experiencing fewer of those symptoms. I'm still taking my omeprazole, but it's definitely been better, which has been helpful.
So I do also suffer with that, or did suffer with that type of thing as well. And I ended up being diagnosed with GERD. So, and from what I've read, it's fairly common in people with celiac disease as well. Just anything digestive, right? So it definitely sounds like something you should speak with your doctor about, Romina. Hopefully they can help you out there, though. Let's see here.
Sarah followed up and asked, why do you say that we should eat gluten unless you don't have? Like you need to be eating gluten until you're tested for celiac. Like you need to be eating gluten because all of the tests we have require gluten ingestion, either for the blood work because that's antibodies that are created when you're eating gluten, And then the endoscopy is looking for the damage created to your villi when you're eating gluten. So again, right now we don't have a test that can diagnose celiac disease without the consumption of gluten.
Yeah.
There are some they're working on, but they need funding to have it get through all the stages or whatever.
Yeah.
But
you had been talking about the children in your neighborhood that you kind of become like step parent almost, or you're there for them in a way that,
I'd say we're the safe house, like in a
there you
sense.
go.
Yeah,
That's
we're
a good
kind of
way
the
to
safe
say
house.
it. So because you have this relationship with the children in your community or in your neighborhood, um, I guess it kind of, to me, I'm wondering if you've ever considered adoption or if this is how you.
Yes, we had, but that's part of a longer, bigger story between my husband and I, and out of respect for him, I don't talk about it a lot. I will say for myself, like we had started to consider it, and then I had my first mental health episode about 11 years ago. And so after that, I was pretty much like, nope, we're not going to do that because I just didn't trust myself anymore. Um, and now that I had a second episode this past fall, and this kind of ties into that too, was having intrusive thoughts. And it was interesting after I had that happen, one of my followers ended up sharing about it. And again, intrusive thoughts happen to a lot of women after a postpartum because your hormones are all wacky. And so again, talking about hormonal health is related to mental health.
Yeah.
And so even if you don't want to have kids, like I know we had planned this for a different question, but like I so think it's so important. Even if you don't think you want to have kids, I think fertility and hormonal health should be part of our yearly physical, because like we talked before, like if you're already infertile or struggling, then you try to seek out help for that, like you already feel like a failure. So I really think we need to, and again, even women who don't think they want to have kids, which is fine, again, talking about reproductive health talks about your fallopian tubes and your ovaries, which can all go haywire. So I really wish that we think that getting pregnant and having a kid is so easy and that's a natural thing. But I don't know about in Canada, but like we have sadly a high mortality rate, a maternity mortality rate here in the United States. Like it shouldn't be this high, and it's definitely higher for women of color, probably because they don't get adequate health care like they should. But it's just, I don't know. I think I mean, we see like I'm on Twitter, and like my Twitter stuff that I follow is celiac disease, but it's also education, it's also faith. Um, but like seeing someone who would talk about the doctor's like, oh, you're just on your period and you're in pain, like, and it turns out someone's got a ruptured appendicitis, or women are just poo-pooed, like, oh, you're just being a woman or whatever. And I'm like, no, we know what the heck pain is. Like we know when our pain is normal and we know when it's not.
That's
So
right. But is any pain at all normal? Like, that's the thing. I think that in a way we've been conditioned to just accept that because we're women, we're supposed to experience this pain, and we just put up with it because that's what women have always done. Right? So in general, healthcare for women is the pits, and it needs to get better.
Right. It definitely does. But so, yeah, that's why. And, and sometimes too, like people think an adoption is important, and, that wasn't our route. And I adore people who have gone that route. But like, I will say, for instance, my brother-in-law, my niece and nephew were adopted through foster care. And that was not an easy process. And I think, sometimes we tell people like, oh, you're going to adopt, like, oh, just adopt and it's going to be so easy. I'm like, no, like these kids, if whether it being that they've been taken away from their parents because their parents aren't safe, or some horrific thing has happened, like their parents have gotten in a car accident and died, like that is trauma. That child is going to need help. And that's just the way it is. I mean, depends on how young you get that child. My niece and nephew, were both under the age of 5 when they were adopted, but they also, because their parents were not safe, my nephew has some mental health and learning disability issues. My niece is great. She's doing okay. It's crazy because I was their nanny till they were 5, and now they're like 22, and I'm like, you're not supposed to be this old. And my niece is getting a house, and I'm like, how is this even possible? I'm really old now.
Yeah.
But
My nephew turned 30 this year, so
yeah. So when people say like, oh, you should just adopt, I'm like, one, it's not inexpensive.
No.
I mean, adopting through foster care is cheaper, but if you're going through private adoption, that's not cheap. That's expensive, and not every family has that option. And I remember, and people ask questions, and I was at my physical therapist of all places. I had one season where I must have had bursitis in my shoulder or something, and I went to physical therapy, ended up having to get cortisone injections. But like one day I was getting treated by the actual owner of the facility. Usually I had my own not personal, but I saw somebody else usually in the office, and I was seeing her, and she's like, oh, you don't have kids? Well, why didn't you do this? And why didn't you adopt? And you should adopt. And I'm like, okay, you don't even know me.
No, that's
you have
not.
no idea who I am. You have no idea what my journey is. And those are the conversations that you have with people who are your people, like people that don't know you at all. That's not any of their business. Like, we have all sorts of reasons why we may not do X, Y, or Z. And, we have a lot of violence in our neighborhood. I've called 911 more times in my life than I never thought that I would. And it's just, the schools here are a struggle. And there are all sorts of reasons that people choose not to adopt. I mean, I want to encourage people to adopt. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but that may not be the easy case for everybody.
Right.
So,
it's their journey.
Yeah. And so it's, it definitely was a challenge, especially we talked about that with my niece and nephew, like, with my nephew, Sean, like the mother's extended family really fought for him, like tried to get, and so my brother-in-law and sister-in-law didn't know if they were actually going to get to keep this child that they love so much. And that's an emotional weight too. But then on the other hand, with my other niece, with my niece Katie, like nobody was fighting for her, which is heartbreaking in itself, that there's nobody, luckily, like the one parent who signed off on rights, like the Cleggs are so great, like you're not going to beat them. Like you can't offer what my brother-in-law, because my brother-in-law is also a teacher, or was, he just retired. The money that they had, the connections, just the education and the stability, so that whole court process is, are you going to get to keep the child? Are you not? Like, how do you have this emotional investment, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. So,
There's just a lot to think about.
It is. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to go out and adopt a child tomorrow. Like, that's not how this works.
No, it's not going to be. You don't have the benefit of you don't always have the benefit of having that child with you from the get-go. You don't know their medical history. You don't know. There's so many things that you don't know. And if you're not prepared for everything, then, there's a chance that it won't work out. And is that better for the child or not? Like it's definitely, I think it depends on the couple.
Right. And that's it might not work out. Like, that's why we never did IVF. Because I know, one, that I have a friend that's done it and has been successful, but I know it costs a lot of money. I know it's painful, and it's not guaranteed that it's going to work. And my husband and I had a long conversation and decided that's not for us. That this wasn't for us. So we just kind of came to peace with either we will or we won't. And, that's what happens. So.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not. So with the it will or it won't happen, it ties in with faith also, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Conception. For you, you mentioned earlier that you were thinking, why isn't it happening for me? And, so what was your experience with that? Because knowing that
So for those, so I have a post about this on my website called Lucky, because I had somebody who put their foot in their mouth and told me how lucky I was I didn't have children,
Mm,
um, which was interesting because this happened like, I don't know, like 5 years ago, and I thought I had gotten over all those emotions, and it just kind of dredged everything up again. Plus, in that time we, we're having some other situations happening. Um, and so years ago, um, my when we were trying, and we were even at the time, this will sound weird to somebody else, like we were even praying before, we were literally trying,
mhm.
um, everything that you could possibly do. And then my husband's like, let's just get a crib and show God that we trust him, which was a shock to me because we were also trying to get out of debt at the same time. When I'm like, you want to
Right.
buy what? So I'm like, but we're trying to, this doesn't make sense. And it was a very emotional time. And to be honest, that crib is still in our house. It's in the basement, taken apart because I couldn't look at it after I had my emotional breakdown. Um, so, and I thought for a very long time that I had sinned, that God was mad at me, that I was being punished, that I was awful. Um, and again, my gynecologist, like I told him that story, and he was like, he felt so bad for me. He's like, no, like we know now why you couldn't, but
Right.
I don't, and it's taken a lot of perspective and a better therapist and better medicine to be able to have some distance, to be able to see things more clearly,
Right.
and to understand that that's not the case. I don't want women who aren't able to conceive to think that God thinks they're a failure or they're awful, because that's definitely not at all the situation. Because, and I think too, like, the people so misquote the Bible, and it makes me so angry. Like they're like, oh, if you had enough faith. I'm like, okay, that's not even, like, Jesus does say, if you have the faith as small as a mustard seed, that meant to be encouragement, not condemnation. you know, like when people say, oh, if you had enough faith, this would work. I'm like, I just want to slap somebody, because that's not how God operates. Um, so, and I get really frustrated too. Like I said, like things I follow on Twitter are celiac stuff, but also education, and also things of faith that people that I follow. And there seems to be this push right now, especially in some churches and some women, where they're like, oh, like the highest achievement for any woman is to be a mother,
Oh,
that's what God
yes.
made you to do. And I'm like, that's just so, that shows no mercy or grace at all. Like, one, they're wrong. Like,
Mm,
we are women in and of ourselves. We are meant to be here to do more than just have kids. That's not our only,
mhm.
check the box, had a kid, now you fulfilled all of God's plans for your life. That's not even how this works. So like I just, it just makes me sad. It makes me angry that people manipulate the Bible to say things like that, because that's not what God intended at all. So yeah, I it's taken a long time, and it's been an interesting faith journey. Like we aren't currently going to a church. There's a long story behind that, but I almost feel like walking away from church a little bit has given me more perspective. I always tell people that I listen to the Holy Post podcast. It's an amazing podcast, because they talk to different authors and people that maybe think about things differently, and gives you different insight. And yeah, I just I have, the more distance I have, the more you can see the bigger picture.
Right.
So and maybe God's plans are that you're going to help the kid down the street whose dad is not in his life, and mom has no job, and he can't get back and forth. I mean, that was the situation. The family that we know so well, like his mom had no car, she had no license. He got kicked off the bus. He had no way to get to school. So for 6 months of my life, I was driving a kid every day back and forth to school, and we're having deep conversations and talking about getting homework done. And um, yeah, and now he's got a good job and living with his girlfriend, and still does stupid boy stuff because he's a young boy. He's a young man, he's 23 and still does stupid stuff. but he knows that I love him and
Right.
that he is important to us. And sometimes he'll even call me on Mother's Day and just say, "Hey, I'm thinking of you and thank you for investing your time in my life."
That's pretty
So,
sweet.
I told people that too. Like, I grew up in Lansing Township, white suburbs. And if we had stayed there, I wouldn't be the person I am now. Flint is definitely not an easy place to live at all. Um, but it's opened to my eyes to poverty and injustice, and it makes me, um, I don't know, just a little more aware of the injustice in the world and injustice in the world. It makes me want to be a person that tries to help fight injustice, I guess.
Right.
So, or at least stand up for people that are not as fortunate as me. So,
Right. No, that's great. I mean, not everyone has that outlook, unfortunately. Um, I'm just gonna zip back to your diagnosis of, I think it was the fibroids and
mm-hmm.
endometriosis. Um, because of your celiac disease, that you had mentioned that there was a treatment prescribed that you weren't sure of because you
Yeah.
had celiac disease.
Yeah. Well, part of it was celiac disease and part of it was mental health. So I
Right.
still have one ovary. My surgeon wanted to leave one because he didn't want to put me in early menopause.
Mm.
Um, but if I were to take that medicine he recommended for the endometriosis, it would reduce my estrogen levels. And we know that hormones can affect mental health. And so that was my first reason for not wanting to take it. And then the other reason was because that particular pill, medicine, whatever, impacts your bone density. And so we already know that people with celiac disease can have impaired bone density. And I was like, let's just not. Let's
Yeah.
just not. And so my fibroids have probably grown back. My endometriosis has probably grown back. We'll, if I have serious problems, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So
Right.
I was recently diagnosed with some thyroid issues, so that's really more of my concern right now is getting that all figured out. So at the moment, things are stable, but yeah, I just and my gynecologist respected that. He's like,
Mhm.
okay, I can understand why you're concerned about that. And he was like, and he said he wanted you to consider taking it, and he didn't say you have to take it.
Right.
So, and he was really great about listening to my input. So,
Right. Well, it's more than some doctors will do,
mhm.
unfortunately. Um, you had also mentioned your husband. I know I don't want to get too much into your husband
Right.
because I know you don't like to share too much on social media.
Mhm.
But he's a teacher
Mhm.
and you have a degree in elementary
Yeah.
education. So, how do you manage the mental load of being that surrogate parent to some of the students, especially as the world is now with COVID and such?
Right.
That must
Um,
be very,
it can be very hard on him. The one thing that I think has guided him when he did this student teaching, actually at a Catholic school in Lansing, the teacher that he was with, Anne, she was wonderful, said, your job is to teach the student, not the subject. Your job is to teach the student, and that relationship is what's most important. And that, there are stories that, he does. I so love this about him. And like, there are times I just have to remind him what a great teacher he is. So he does after school clubs in the fall. He does guitar club because my husband is a guitar addict and has like 6 guitars and guitar pedals and stuff that I don't even understand. And it makes him happy and like, okay, whatever. But in the spring, he does anime club. And the great thing about Japanese animation club, like Pokemon and Digimon and that type of stuff, and things more advanced that I don't even understand, like all the Studio Ghibli stuff, like Howl's Moving Castle and Ponyo and
I've never
um,
heard of those.
my neighbor Totoro, those type of anime. Like a lot of those kids that like that are the fringe kids. They don't fit in. They're not on the football team. They're not the beauty
Mhm.
queens. They're not, and like the anime club is like the one place they fit in. And a lot of kids, he has had so many students that are on the autistic spectrum, and he does so well with them. Um, So, he really takes that part of his job seriously. But I remember, one year he had a girl come to him because she felt safe talking to him and said, Mr. Clegg, I've been cutting myself and I want to stop. And she didn't feel safe going to the counselor at first by herself. And, you know, like you just meet the kids where they're at,
Right.
He's gone to student funerals, and I think we've even gone to a parent funeral before, and, and coworkers funerals and stuff. And he's really lucky that he's part of a good school district and good community, that it's not the case for everybody. He's very lucky that he has very supportive staff. So, and that is a mental load. Like, I will admit that it's exhausting, especially in these past 2 years of parents being upset. And there's been a lot of screaming parents about masks and vaccines, and just, it's hard when you're trying to give your all and you're being met with just inconsiderate behavior.
Right.
So it's been hard. And like, he comes home and he's exhausted after time he's taking a nap, because mentally it's exhausting. So, so in a way, those are his kids, and those are our
Right.
kids. And like, we just went to the 8th grade play this week, and I went with him. I love doing stuff like that. We've gone to football games and anime club every year. I have a recipe on my website. I think I call it fruit sushi or something like that. But it's basically Rice Krispies. It's basically Rice Krispie treats, but shaped like a rice ball. And then you put a Swedish fish on it, and then you wrap fruit by the foot over it, so it looks like a piece of sushi. And I bring that every year for Anime Club, and the kids get so excited. And I love being able to interact with them, because I don't teach, and it's my one way of still being part of the education process, I guess. So
Right.
apart from subbing, which I did, and I'm like, nope, we're not doing that right now. So at least not in his district. It ends up like, I would never end up subbing for him, because then his kids would never let me live it down or whatever. Their kids are awkward. Middle school kids are awkward, and he is amazing that he can teach them. So, and I do love middle school kids. I really do. They're a fun age. But yeah, it's interesting.
I
So,
bet.
Yeah.
So with your while you were trying to conceive and still considering having a child and everything, were you worried about celiac disease? Since it's genetic, were you worried about passing that on to a child? Or
you know what? No. I mean, maybe I was. Like, if you ask me that question now, it's easy to look back and say no. And I think too, especially with the way our world is, like, my dad had it, I have it. Like, I know what the tools are to successfully live with celiac disease. I mean, it's not always easy, but there are lots of things I still do in life. It's not keeping me from living a good life.
Right.
And I so want to tell parents, like, I know there's so many parents that feel guilty because it's genetic, and I just want to like hug them and tell them, like, this is not your fault. Please don't carry that guilt or that burden, because you're never meant to carry it. This is, we know that 30% of the people have the genes, but only 1% develop it. So if doctors can't figure it out, you can't either. So please quit feeling guilty, and there are a lot, there's lots of genetic stuff we pass on to kids, height and hair color and eye color. But, I think the bigger concern of what we pass on to our kids is the kind of people they are. Are we passing on hate and prejudice and that sort of stuff? Like, that's the thing that you should feel concerned about if you're passing that on. So, there's so many kids that I know that have celiac, and they're so compassionate towards other kids with food allergies or other disabilities. And, and someday we may have a cure for celiac. We don't know, but just teach your kid. That's my bigger concern. What type of personality and integrity and resilience you're passing on to your kids. Celiac is the least of your worries.
Right. Yeah.
So
I agree. So, are there any other topics about motherhood that you would like to address?
Yes, I wanted to talk really quick. So we, and I apologize for my screen. Like, it's not bright here in Michigan anymore. Like, I don't have a lot of light. So sorry for the grainy video, because I can't easily turn my light on in my office. So we were foreign exchange parents for a very brief period of time. His name was Daniel. He not only had celiac, but he also had type 1 diabetes. There was a problem with his insulin. We didn't know at the time. He ended up only being here for like 2 months instead of being here a whole school year. Maybe it was 3 months. But as challenging as it was, and there were some other challenges more than just his diabetes or some other things going on, and it was definitely not smooth sailing for us, but I don't regret it. I'm very glad we did it. It taught me a lot more about type 1 diabetes, to be honest, and it helped me to be a better advocate and ally. I guess I should say ally for type 1 diabetes families. And he unfortunately passed when he was older, not when he was here. People always panic. I'm like, no, he didn't die when he was here. He died like many years later, but from his type 1 diabetes. And I have a stronger bond with his mom now than when he was here. And my college roommate, Sarah, her family has had multiple foreign exchange students and such great experiences. And I would just tell people that, if you're not able to have kids, consider doing foreign exchange. There's so many kids from other countries that have celiac disease that want to come here but are afraid to do so because people aren't going to understand their dietary needs. Yeah. So I would just encourage people to do that. They come with their own health insurance. They're not on your health insurance. They come with other things, other money. Like, yes, you're going to have to feed a teenager, which that is a lot. But they come with their own money to buy clothes and buy souvenirs and stuff like that. So it's not like, it's going to cost you money, but it's not like you're, and plus they're coming as a teenager. You're not like potty training them. You're not
right. They're self-sufficient for the most part.
Right. And we didn't do it again because our area is not celiac friendly. There's not a lot of great gluten-free restaurants. And Daniel came from Finland, where they had gluten-free McDonald's and gluten-free Pizza Hut and gluten-free everything. So it was very hard for him to come to a city that did not have a lot of options. But there were definitely some rewarding conversations. Like, I would not have read the Twilight series if it were not for Daniel, because I was against it at the time, but that's what he loved. And I'm like, okay, I want to build a relationship, so I'll read them if it's something we can talk about. But yeah, I would definitely, but make sure you're going through a reputable organization. Ours was okay, but there are some not so great organizations. Just do your work. But I would really encourage people with celiac to be willing to open up their home to, a child with celiac that wants to see the United States and understand, or Canada, obviously, to try a different, living in different places. It does it opens their eyes to a new way of seeing things in different culture, but the same way it goes the other way too. It's made me research things about Finland, and I really want to go there now. And, it helps you understand that your way of doing things isn't always the right way, or like my husband teaches foreign language. That's a big way. Yeah. And my husband teaches French. That's a big thing for us, that it's not just language. You're learning culture. You're learning to think differently than somebody else and open your mind to different viewpoints and cultures. So that's really important. So I would encourage people that maybe if maybe if adoption isn't for you, and you haven't had children, maybe consider doing foreign exchange, especially if there's lots of great gluten-free options in your area. If you have a really good school district, I would recommend it highly.
Good to know. It's something that I've thought about too, but I'm not quite ready for that yet. Not quite ready, but
and some people, like my college roommate, when she was a kid, they had foreign exchange students while Sarah was still in high school, but they definitely kept it on even after Sarah left. And so for some people, it's like, I'm comfortable doing that when my own kids are gone because they're nervous about, that interaction. And, that's totally understandable. But I know Sarah's parents are older, so I don't think they have foreign exchange students now, but they did for a very long time after Sarah and I were done with college. So, and it's just been a really rewarding experience. Like when Sarah got married, like half the foreign exchange student kids came back and they were in her wedding. And,
my goodness.
So Sarah went and stayed with them in Spain for, a semester. And it's just,
That's great.
again, and it really helps you to see the world and think about things differently,
Yeah,
different viewpoints. So,
sure. Yeah, I just think that, I mean, my son's almost 15 years old now, and we have most days there's a challenge of some sort that we're getting through. So to add another person into the household might be a little difficult for us at this stage.
yeah.
But yeah, I know we have one of Sam's teachers from the school he used to go to actually does foreign exchange every year, because our town is the sister town to Shikao. I can never pronounce it right. Shikao, Japan. It's our sister town, our sister city.
Yeah.
And so they do foreign exchange every year. And his old teacher does that, and she has 2 or 3 boys that come and stay, and she's got 2 boys of her own, and it's just a riot. Like,
Yeah.
they
Oh,
just
yeah,
have
for
so
sure.
much fun. So, but I think it would be rewarding for a lot of people. Do you have anything else that you want to cover? We've gone through our questions, and I don't know if anyone has any questions for us. I'm just going to look through. There hasn't been a lot of comments.
Yeah, I don't think there's been any new ones. But
No. Corey asked who I was trying to see as my gastroenterologist, and I don't have one. I don't have a name of a person or anything. I just have my doctor putting in a
referral
request. Yeah, that's it. That's what I'm waiting on. So she's put the referral through, and it's just hasn't. There's just not a lot to see, I guess, right now. Nobody's available. So, but I guess there's no more questions. But I want to thank you for coming on here with me. I really appreciate it. I think that it's a chat that needed to happen for the community because, again, fertility is a huge issue in the celiac community, and it just isn't covered. Even the organizations in the US and the Canadian Celiac Association, it's not something that you find a lot of information about on the websites either. So hopefully this will be of some help to people. And, if anybody's still in here and you want to know about Margaret's Instagram handle, there she is at MI Gluten Free Gal. And Twitter is the same. I believe they're all the same.
They're all the same.
Yes, so you can find her.
Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, all the same.
Excellent. Makes you easy to find. I did that with mine too, because it's like, it's all MGF Kitchen across the board. All right. Well, I don't know how to. Thank you
for having me on. And if anybody,
nice
if anybody has any additional questions, feel free to reach out to me. And I mean, I answer all of them. Some things are obviously private and between my husband and I, but I'm definitely willing to listen. And sometimes that's all you need is just somebody who's willing to listen and let you know you're not alone. So looks like Corey is giving you a recommendation for a doctor.
Yeah, I see that. I do have my doctor checking in for, you need a referral to see a gastroenterologist. So my doctor is putting I'll mention Dr. Switzer to her to see if that's someone that she has a relationship with. But otherwise, I kind of just got to sit back and wait, unfortunately. But
well, thanks so much for having me on. It's dark and you probably can barely see me. I apologize. So
no, it's okay. We can still see you. So I'll be sure to. I'm going to be recording this. It is recording, and I will be sharing it on the link to the social media. You'll be able to get it on Facebook and YouTube. So I'll make sure that I post those links as well. So
all right,
and hopefully we can chat again sometime.
Yes, that would be great.
Excellent.
We'll talk to you later. Thanks so much for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.